Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ravi Ramaswamy. I am the Senior Director with Health Systems at the Philips Innovation Campus. I have been with the industry for 39 years, out of which I have spent about 25 years in the healthcare space. My last two assignments being a decade with GE and a decade with Philips. My sincere thanks to Unicom for giving me this opportunity to share my 2 cents in this Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Summit 2020. What I am really going to talk to you about is the role of AI and big data in terms of how it is going to decentralize care and the impact that it will have in terms of transforming healthcare delivery. Before that, let me sort of set the context by showing you some snippets in the global healthcare scenario. By 2030, we expect to have 8.5 billion people, out of which 686 billion or 11.6% of the population would be elders who would be requiring geriatric care. And the expend is expected to be around $1.4 trillion. The US OPD revenue since 1995 has gone up from 30% to 52%, which drives two facts. One, people are a lot more conscious of their health. And number two, the younger generation falls a lot more sick than the earlier ones. If I look at the hospitals in Germany, 12% of the hospitals are in distress. The average profits that a hospital makes in Holland is 1.8%. Lifestyle diseases and chronic diseases seem to have raised their heads, and what you get to see are percentages out there. So we see a significant percentage in terms of ischemic heart, respiratory diseases, as also diabetes and hypertension. Physician burnout is at 78%, given the fact that we do not have adequate resources to meet the ever-increasing healthcare needs. 50% of the population have gone mobile and are accessible on the net. So in that sense, it tells you about the role that telecom has played thus far and how we can use telecom to decentralize care. In a survey that was done, it was found that almost 75% of the people are willing to embrace technology. The Indian market is slated to be at 372 billion by 2022. Productivity through AI is expected to go up by 18%. The per capita spend in Southeast Asia is $96 as compared to $12,200 for the healthcare spend in the US. 99% of the population has free health in Thailand. And in the walk-in clinics, you find that 30% of the population is millennials as compared to 18% baby boomers, which also account for the increased revenue in the US OPD segment. So the problem that we are trying to look at here is not a small one. It is certainly non-trivial. 1 out of 3 people is expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. 500 million people are expected to suffer from pulmonary and respiratory diseases. 400 million people would have diabetes, and an estimated billion adults have the propensity for hypertension. So when you're looking at problems of this scale, you realize that the challenges that you need to deal with is going to be ever increasing, and no normal solutions is going to satiate the needs and demands of what healthcare throws at us. So availability, accessibility, affordability, awareness, and chronic diseases are on the rise. This was a photo that was shot in Shanghai. And one of the things that I want you to observe is, one, the crowd. The outpatients are huge out here. And number two, look at the age profile of people. You tend to see a lot more youngsters out here, which means that chronic diseases and medical care is needed much earlier in their life than ever before. That also goes and stresses the system. So conventional approaches alone, as I said, will not help in addressing these challenges. And that's the reason why we need to look at exponential technologies. Now let's look what is happening in other segments that are the other verticals closer to healthcare. You look at consumer centricity is going up in a big way. There's a certain amount of engagement that each one of us bring to the table in terms of monitoring our own health, be it using Fitbits or Apple Watch or whatever. Number two, I think the quadruple aim, which talks about an experience, a very positive experience for a caregiver, a positive experience for the patient, reduced cost of care, and also increased outcomes. Now, that is something that is catching up like wildfire. Network, in the sense we are shifting to the home. Like, for example, a case in Japan, you find you have got a decreasing birth rate and extended longevity, because of which you find that treating chronic cases in a hospital is simply not going to work out, and 96% of the Japanese hospitals are on loss. So given that, and also the fact that the home setting is much better from hospital acquired infection or any one of those issues, as also a lower cost and better outcomes, the care is shifting into the home now. 24/7 connection over a digital network is something that patients would love to have. And of course, the provider consolidation, the payer retailer consolidation. So these are basically the trends that are shaping the industry. And the question is, how are we going to take advantages of all these? So when you start looking at digital technologies, they bring in certain capabilities which otherwise simply don't exist. In the sense that with a watch, I can monitor myself continuously over a period of time, be it when I'm in a good state or be it when I am in a sick state. And therefore, inferences can be drawn in terms of how the behavior patterns are in these two distinct states, and therefore derive meaningful insights. Those could be wide or longitudinal data, which is basically continuous monitoring over time. Then you have deep data, which is where you have more information than ever before, in the sense that I can look at a functional MRI image, or I can look at using digital pathology and synthetic biology, I can go down to the genomic level. So in that sense, I am able to get a lot more data about the history of the patient and the history of the disease. And then, of course, you've got the big data recognition, which is basically more like dense data. So if you were to look at all of these, so digitization has given us enough and more data to deal with. The question is, how can we use this in decentralizing care and driving decision support systems? If we look at the challenges of a health system, we find that people don't seek community care, possibly because community care is simply not available or is not to the expected standards what a person would need. Therefore, what happens is people normally skip all the primary care and the secondary care and go directly to a tertiary care, because of which the footfall increases. There's a patient overflow, longer waiting time of hospitals, and a wastage of time of very, very competent doctors who would have otherwise been used for dealing with complex cases have to look at simple issues. So basically what we are trying to say is, how do we create a system by which the quality of care that is available in a tertiary care can also be given to a primary care and secondary care through the use of AI and big data. So by doing so, what we are trying to do is to declog the system at the tertiary level and try and see that you're enabling care access in a primary and secondary level as well. And that's what's going to be the aim. So when I look at big data, AI and big data are driving digital transformation, be it population health management, be it healthy living, continuous health tracking, genomics, image quantification, computational pathology, hospital at home, context-aware monitoring. You find a lot of opportunity which is being driven by AI and big data. And what I really want to do is to come down to a few use cases to demonstrate the fact that these are not sort of science fiction, or these are not only on the PPTs, but they are being actually implemented on ground and the results seen. So let me go to a couple of use cases now. First one is empowering patients with chronic conditions to self-manage. As you can see here, the patients don't have to really go to the doctor. You've got devices which are able to pick up data from the patient and transfer it over the network so that the doctor gets a live view of what the patient's condition is. Depending upon that, the trending can also be done, saying, is the trending in the right track, or is it going into an undesirable area where you might really need to drive a different set of interventions. And then you have got AI, which basically tells you the prognosis and also gives some sort of a predictability to what your future state is actually going to be. And that helps the clinician in making a much better decision. So once you start empowering care providers and through AI and big data, you are able to track, for example, the sleep patterns. You know what is the meal duration, what was the last meal taken, and how much was it taken? How many times have you gone to the bathroom for urination? What has been the content of urine? What has been the urine output? So basically what you're trying to do is use all the basic parameters of an individual, and you have got algorithms which basically not only looks at yours, but looks at a cohort population in terms of identifying probabilities and predictions in terms of how you are actually going to behave going forward, and therefore help take better treatment. So by doing so, we realize that we are able to get down the care cost by about 26% and readmissions rate by 52%, because you are able to monitor and drive compliance through use of data, which is backed by AI and clinical decision support systems. Let's take the case of a critical care. What happens here is, if a person, like for example, say is in Mandya, which is about 100 kilometers from Bangalore, and if he has to, which is basically in the rural district of Bangalore, if he has to come to Bangalore, in case if there is an event that he is faced with, he is going to lose the golden hour. So what if we had a hub and spoke distributed model, wherein you had, say, a tertiary care hospital in Bangalore overseeing a remote ICU? So when the patient gets admitted to the ICU, you are able to see all his vitals, you are able to see the video, you are able to talk to the nurse and the attending doctor in terms of what the state is, what the condition is, and then using your knowledge as an intensivist, you are able to remote manage the ICC, the critical care unit back in the spoke. So in doing so, for one, you are decentralizing the intensivist care, because intensivist in India is only 500 for a population of 1.3 billion. And we do know definitively that intensivist-led care is far better than being managed by an anesthetist or a general practitioner. So here again is a case where you are able to take the expertise that is available in a tertiary care and decentralize it over a primary or a secondary care. And in doing so, you are avoiding the hassle of that person traveling. You save on the health of the individual, because you are able to save the golden hour in case if it is a cardiac event. You are able to drive down cost, because the cost of an ICU in Mandya is going to be 1/5 of what you would have in Bangalore. And number 4, he is much closer to his home environment and therefore get well attended to by his family members who would otherwise have to come and stay put in Bangalore, which is a challenge in its own right. So looking at all of this, you find that you are able to transfer data from one point to the other. And then you have got decision support systems, like for example, sepsis bundles, or you would have early deterioration index indicators, by which you actually know when the patient is going to crash in the next 6 hours, 12 hours, or 18 hours, what the recovery path is going to be. Is he going to require a readmission? And all sort of those decisions can well be taken a priori, and accordingly, the patient care can be taken on to a very different level, which also well aligns with what the quadruple aim we talked about earlier on. So if we look at the economics of remote intensive care, you find that the mortality rate goes down by 33%, the length of stay reduces by 30%, and the improved throughput brings in much better hospital revenue. So all in all, I think it's a win-win for everybody if you are able to do this. Next, look at the role of AI in imaging world. Look at brain anatomy and segmentation. Delineating anatomical structures in the MRI brain even before a doctor actually sees it is something that an AI can actually do. Brain tumor segmentation is something that is again based on the MR scan. You have AI algorithms which basically detect it. Like for example, let's look at amide proton transfer technology. What AI, artificial intelligence, basically does there is to understand the amide protons that are there in a tumor and then advise you whether the tumor would need an intervention or you allow the tumor to go the way it is. There are certain cases where I have seen where tumor which are very, very small, say 3-4 mm in size, have to be operated upon because they are fast growing tumors. Whereas you have seen lumps of tumors which are 4 centimeters in size, and they can be there because you find that they are a lot more stable and a lot less viral as what you would have otherwise seen. So you are able to make these calls without even opening up the brain to understand it. And that's the power of AI, that it gets to the table. You look at bone age assessment, taking an X-ray photograph and applying AI on it, I am able to estimate the age of the individual. It can be used for both forensic science and also for sports medicine. Tuberculosis detection, another common application wherein you find that you are, like for example, let me take a case in the Middle East where we had to screen patients for tuberculosis. Migrant workers have to undergo tuberculosis screening once in 2 years, which means the doctor on a daily basis has to look at a pile of 2000 X-rays. It is extremely taxing because 90% of them are normally normal. So you build an algorithm by which it is able to segregate the normal from the abnormal. The doctor first focuses on the abnormal, and the accuracy that you're talking of is upwards of 96%. So the doctor spends his time looking at the abnormal reports first and then glances over the normal to clear them. By doing so, you are able to increase the productivity of the doctor by at least 25 to 30%. Telehealth solution. By wearing biosensors and continuously monitoring your health, you find that you can have a situation wherein every transaction, every incidence of yours is monitored irrespective of which place you are in. Whether you are in a rehab, whether you are in your home, in an acute care setting, in an ICU setting, emergency department, or you're on a transport, it is almost like a bank looking at your financial transactions and reporting to you just in case any fraudulent transaction arises. So here also, if there is an arrhythmia which is going to happen, the AI algorithms pick it up, inform the caregiver and your near and dear ones, and that in turn can trigger a series of workflows, like for example, having an ambulance come and pick you up, take you to an emergency room where your ECG is already pre-fed into the system so that they really know what the patient is coming for, and therefore time can be saved, and then take you into the ICU and what have you. So the entire workflow can be orchestrated based on the AI and deep learning that that we are today capable of. And it also gives you a protection and a peace of mind because you are pretty sure that you have got somebody, a second eye, which is basically looking over you and trying to take care of your own health. Biophysical modeling is another important aspect that we need to look at. Here, what you're trying to do is use multiple modalities, like for example, an ECG, an MR scan, or a CT scan, and your normal physiological parameters in terms of constructing a digital equivalent of you. And in doing so, you drive interventions on the digital twin, and then find out which is the one that is going to give you the best result. And once you have determined that, then you can take it and apply it on an individual. Like for example, say treatment of fibrillation, of atrial fibrillation, you would have 3 or 4 different options. Ablation could be one of them. There could be many other techniques that you would be using. So which is the one that is going to be best for you can actually be tried out and tested on a digital twin, and then can be implemented in order to drive success and guaranteed outcomes. So basically, it helps you in providing diagnosis, treatment planning, procedure guidance, monitoring, and also procedure training in terms of bringing up from a skill upgradation purpose for the younger doctors. So the capabilities that AI and machine learning bring to the table is enormous. And the question is, how are we going to sort of use these capabilities in order to ensure that a continuum of care that we are looking at, be it healthy living, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, or home care, is all sort of integrated, and we are looking at it from an end-to-end perspective connected care and health informatics being the backbone in terms of data interoperability and data inter-exchange between multiple different units and stakeholders and players that come into the healthcare space. So I think I just wanted to, I possibly want to leave you with a thought saying that AI is here to stay. AI cannot replace a doctor, but AI can give you sufficient insights and information which will help the doctor in making the right call, the right decision at the right moment in order to drive the right outcomes. I really feel that there is so much that science has brought in thus far, and there is a lot more that we are going to see in the years to come, thanks to the work that we are doing in the AI and the big data space. And I'm sure this will help us address the quadruple aim in terms of enhancing patient experience, the caregiver experience, driving better outcomes, as also lowering the cost of care, and decentralizing healthcare to a point that it is available for all people, just the way that they would have got it in a tertiary city, as much as what they would get in a rural or a suburban setting. So I think with that, I would like to end my presentation. In case if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to take it. Thank you.